The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stood clutching my prescription bottles, watching the automatic doors of Willow Creek Pharmacy slide open and closed for what felt like the 100th time. 40 minutes had passed since my daughter Samantha drove away with her husband and children, claiming a sudden work emergency. At 71 years old, abandoned without transportation, I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart exactly, but my faith in the family I had sacrificed everything for. That moment in the pharmacy would become the catalyst that exposed a shocking truth: my own daughter and son in law had systematically drained $128,000 from my savings while treating me like an ATM with legs. What happened next would change all our lives forever. If you've ever felt taken advantage of by loved ones or struggled with setting boundaries, this story will resonate deeply with you. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of courage and transformation. The journey I'm about to share might just give you the strength to reclaim your own life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stood clutching my prescription bottles, watching the automatic doors of Willow Creek Pharmacy slide open and closed for what felt like the 100th time. Each swoosh brought a fresh wave of hope that maybe, just maybe, my family would remember they had left me here. But 40 minutes had passed since my daughter Samantha drove away with her husband and children, claiming a sudden work emergency that couldn't wait. Standing there among strangers picking up their medications, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper: my faith in the people I had sacrificed everything for. That moment would become the beginning of the end of their comfortable life built on my dime. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and at 71 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I believed in loyalty, in showing up, in putting the people you love before yourself. For the past 4 years, that belief had cost me nearly everything I owned, though I was only beginning to understand the true price. That Tuesday afternoon in March had started typically enough in the cramped ranch house I shared with my daughter Samantha, her husband Greg, and their 3 children. Samantha worked as a dental hygienist at a busy practice downtown, while Greg bounced between construction jobs depending on the season and his mood. Their kids, Olivia, who was 16, Jason at 13, and little Emma, who had just turned 8, filled the house with constant noise and chaos that comes with active children and parents who never seem quite caught up with their responsibilities. I had moved in with them 4 years ago after my husband Richard passed away from a stroke that took him far too quickly. Richard and I had spent 43 years building a quiet, comfortable life together. He worked as a supervisor at the local water treatment plant, and I had taught second grade at Oak Ridge Elementary for 35 years before retiring. We owned our home outright, had modest savings, and lived simply but contentedly. When Richard died, the house felt impossibly empty, echoing with memories and silence that threatened to swallow me whole. Samantha's invitation to move in seemed like a blessing for all of us. She was struggling with childcare costs and could use help with the kids. I was drowning in loneliness and needed purpose. Greg seemed agreeable enough, and the children were excited about having Grandma Eleanor around all the time. We could pool our resources, share expenses, and create the kind of multi-generational household that used to be common before everyone scattered to their separate corners of suburbia. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly my presence would transform from helpful family member to essential financial lifeline. It began innocently, as these things often do. Samantha mentioned that the daycare costs for Emma were crushing their budget, especially with Jason needing new equipment for baseball and Olivia starting to talk about college. I offered to watch Emma after school and during Samantha's weekend shifts, thinking it would give me something meaningful to do while saving them money. Then Greg's truck broke down, and they couldn't afford the repair bill on top of their other expenses. The estimate was $1 or $200 money they simply didn't have. I stepped in without hesitation, writing a check from the account Richard and I had carefully built over decades of living below our means. Greg promised to pay me back as soon as his next big job came through, and Samantha hugged me with tears in her eyes, saying I was saving their family from disaster. But the next crisis came before Greg's next job, and the one after that arrived before the first loan was repaid. Olivia needed a laptop for school. Jason broke his arm, and they couldn't cover the emergency room copay. Emma required glasses. The washing machine died. The roof leaked during a spring storm. Each emergency felt legitimate, urgent, the kind of unexpected expense that could derail a family already living paycheck to paycheck. And each time, I was there with my checkbook, my savings account, my willingness to help the people I loved most. The grateful hugs gradually became casual thanks. The promises to repay me as soon as possible evolved into vague mentions of paying me back when things settled down. The emergencies became routine, expected, woven so seamlessly into their financial planning that I began to suspect they weren't planning around their own income at all. They were planning around mine. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I had become the primary funding source for a lifestyle none of us could actually afford. Samantha and Greg made decent money when they were both working, but they spent like people who earned twice what they made designer clothes for Olivia, expensive travel baseball leagues for Jason, elaborate birthday parties for Emma that cost more than Richard and I used to spend on Christmas for our entire extended family. When I quietly suggested that maybe some expenses could be trimmed, Samantha would get defensive. Mom, we can't ask the kids to give up everything just because money's tight. They didn't choose this situation. When I mentioned that my own savings were getting depleted faster than I was comfortable with, Greg would assure me that his next contract would be huge enough to pay me back and get them on their feet for good. The next contract never materialized, or if it did, the money seemed to evaporate immediately into new expenses, new emergencies, new reasons why this month wasn't the right time to start paying me back. I began to feel like I was funding a lifestyle rather than helping with temporary setbacks. But every time I considered saying something, one of the children would hug me and tell me I was the best grandma in the world. Or Samantha would have a particularly stressful day at work, and I would remember how much they needed me. My health had been declining gradually the way it does when you're in your 70s and managing multiple chronic conditions. My diabetes required careful monitoring and expensive medications. My blood pressure needed daily medication and regular checkups. My arthritis made simple tasks increasingly difficult, and I had developed the kind of persistent fatigue that comes with age and stress. The monthly cost of keeping myself healthy was substantial, even with Medicare coverage, but it was a necessary expense I had always planned for carefully. The pharmacy visits had become a weekly routine, sometimes more often when my doctor adjusted dosages or added new medications to manage my various conditions. I had established a relationship with the pharmacists at Willow Creek Pharmacy, a small independent store in a strip mall about 15 minutes from the house. They knew my medications, understood my insurance complications, and treated me with the kind of personal attention that had become rare in most medical settings. That particular Tuesday, Samantha had volunteered to drive me to pick up my prescriptions, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the energy in the house that morning, a strange undercurrent of excitement and anticipation that I couldn't quite identify. Greg was home from work, claiming he was between jobs again, and all three kids were being unusually cooperative and quiet. There was a sense that something was planned, something that didn't include me, though. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly felt different. The drive to the pharmacy was awkward in ways I couldn't articulate. Samantha seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and glancing at the clock on the dashboard. She kept making small talk about nothing in particular, asking me questions about my medications that she had never shown interest in before. Greg rode in the passenger seat, which was odd since he usually stayed home during my pharmacy runs, and he spent the entire drive staring out the window like he was watching for something. When we arrived at Willow Creek Pharmacy, Samantha parked directly in front of the store rather than in the parking lot proper. "I'll come in with you, Mom," she said, though I had been managing my own prescriptions independently for 4 years. "You shouldn't have to carry all those bags yourself." It was a considerate gesture that felt somehow performative, like she was making a show of being helpful for reasons I didn't understand. Inside the pharmacy, I approached the familiar counter where Maria, the lead pharmacist, greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell. I have your medications ready. Let me grab them from the back." She disappeared behind the partition where the prescriptions were stored, leaving Samantha and me standing at the counter, waiting. That's when Samantha's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent text message. She looked at the screen and immediately began what could only be described as an Oscar-worthy performance of sudden panic and concern. "Oh no," she exclaimed, loud enough for several other customers to turn and look. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but there's an emergency at the office. Dr. Winters needs me to come in immediately. One of the other hygienists called in sick, and they have a full schedule of patients." I looked at her with confusion. What about me? I still need to get my medications and get home. Samantha was already backing away from the counter, her car keys jingling in her hand with urgent energy. "Oh, that's no problem at all. You can just call an Uber or take a taxi. It'll probably be faster than waiting for us anyway, since we need to stop at home first to get my work clothes." Before I could process what was happening, she was kissing my cheek and promising to make this up to me tonight. Greg appeared at her side, looking appropriately concerned about whatever dental emergency required Samantha's immediate attention on her day off. They were moving toward the exit with coordinated efficiency that suggested this departure had been planned rather than prompted by any actual emergency. "Wait," I called after them, but the automatic doors had already closed behind them. Through the large windows at the front of the store, I watched Greg's pickup truck pull away from the curb and disappear into afternoon traffic. The emergency that had seemed so urgent moments before had apparently allowed time for everyone to get settled in the vehicle and drive away in a calm, orderly fashion. Maria returned with my medications, a collection of bottles and packages that represented the complex array of drugs required to manage my diabetes, blood pressure, and arthritis. Here we are, Mrs. Mitchell. Your insurance covered most of it, but there's still a balance of $193, she said routinely, the way she always did, but this time, the amount felt like a weight settling on my shoulders. Standing alone in a pharmacy with no way to get home, abandoned by the family I had been financially supporting for 4 years, the cost of keeping myself alive suddenly felt like an enormous burden. I paid for the medications with my debit card, gathered the bags, and looked around the store for somewhere to sit while I figured out my next move. Willow Creek Pharmacy had a small seating area near the blood pressure monitoring station, so I settled into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs and pulled out my phone to call for a ride. That's when I discovered that my phone battery was nearly dead, a detail I hadn't noticed during the confusion of Samantha's sudden departure. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was stranded at a pharmacy, surrounded by the medications that kept me healthy, abandoned by the family I had been keeping financially healthy for years. I asked Maria if I could use the store phone to call a taxi, and she kindly directed me to the customer service counter. The dispatcher told me it would be at least an hour wait due to high demand, which meant I would be spending my afternoon in a pharmacy, watching other families come and go while I waited for a stranger to drive me home. As I sat there in that uncomfortable plastic chair, watching the rhythm of a busy pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon, I had time to think, really think for the first time in months about what my life had become. I thought about Richard and how he would have reacted to seeing me abandoned in a public place by our daughter. I thought about the promises Samantha and Greg had made when I moved in with them about being a family and taking care of each other. I thought about the bank statements I had been too trusting to scrutinize closely, showing months of transfers from my accounts to theirs. Most of all, I thought about the look on Samantha's face when she announced her emergency. It hadn't been genuine panic or concern. It had been relief, like she was executing a plan she had been rehearsing. The timing, the coordination, the way Greg had been ready to leave at a moment's notice, despite supposedly being unemployed, it all pointed to one uncomfortable conclusion. This hadn't been an emergency at all. This had been an escape. By the time my taxi arrived, driven by a patient man named Carlos, who asked if I was feeling all right and helped me to the car with my medications, I had made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going home to wait for Samantha to return with apologies and explanations. I was going home to take control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond what I had ever intended to enable. The ride home gave me time to plan, to think through the mechanics of what I was about to do. Carlos, sensing my mood, kept the conversation light, mentioning that he had elderly parents himself and understood how frustrating it could be when family members weren't as reliable as they should be. He had no idea he was transporting a woman who was about to turn her family's financial world upside down. When I walked into the house that evening, using my key to enter what was supposed to be my home, but increasingly felt like a place where I was merely tolerated, I found it empty. Samantha's emergency had apparently extended well into the evening, though I knew from 4 years of living with her that she never worked emergency shifts on Tuesdays. Greg's truck wasn't in the driveway, and the kids' school bags weren't in their usual spots by the front door. The house felt different somehow, like it was holding secrets, waiting for something to happen. I went to my room, the converted garage that had become my living space when I moved in, and pulled out the accordion file where I kept copies of all my financial records. Over the past 4 years, I had maintained careful documentation of every loan, every payment, every financial favor I had extended to Samantha and Greg's family. Richard had taught me the importance of keeping good records, a habit that had served me well during tax preparation and insurance claims, and was apparently about to serve me even better now. The numbers were staggering when I finally added them up properly: $67,000 in direct loans, most of which had been described as temporary help that would be repaid within a few months, $23,000 in household expenses I had covered when they claimed to be short on cash, $38,000 in what they called family investments, things like the down payment on Greg's new truck, money for Olivia's school trip to Europe, the cost of Jason's expensive baseball equipment, and tournament fees. But the most shocking discovery came when I logged into my online banking and started tracing the pattern of automatic payments I had authorized over the past 2 years. Samantha had convinced me that it would be more convenient for everyone if I just set up automatic transfers to help with certain recurring expenses. It's so much easier than you having to remember to write checks every month. Mom, she had said. And this way, you don't have to worry about keeping track of all the different due dates. What I discovered that night, sitting in my converted garage with my laptop and a growing sense of betrayal, was that my convenient automatic transfers had evolved into something far more extensive than I had ever agreed to. My account was automatically paying their mortgage, their car payments, their utilities, their cell phone bills, their insurance premiums, and a dozen other monthly expenses that had somehow become my responsibility without my explicit knowledge or consent. I had become their silent financial partner, subsidizing a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own income. The family emergency fund I had established to help with genuine crises had become their primary operating budget. I wasn't living with my daughter's family as a cherished family member. I was bankrolling their entire existence, enabling a standard of living that would have been impossible without my constant financial support. The most painful discovery was a conversation I overheard between Olivia and one of her friends later that evening when they came home. They were in the kitchen making snacks, apparently unaware that I was in my room with the door slightly open. Olivia's friend was complaining about her parents refusing to buy her something expensive, and Olivia's response cut through me like a knife. "Oh, you just need a grandma like mine," she said casually. "She pays for literally everything. My parents don't even stress about money anymore because Grandma Eleanor takes care of all the important stuff. It's actually kind of awesome." The matter-of-fact way she described my financial support, like I was an unlimited resource rather than a person with feelings and finite savings, crystallized everything I had been sensing but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I wasn't Eleanor Mitchell, beloved mother and grandmother, valued family member, and treasured companion in their daily lives. I was a funding source, a convenient solution to their financial problems. Someone whose contributions had become so expected that abandoning me at a pharmacy felt like a reasonable response to whatever social plans they had made for the afternoon. That night, I made a series of phone calls that would have shocked Samantha and Greg if they had bothered to come home before 11:30. I called my bank and canceled every automatic payment I had authorized for their accounts. I called my financial advisor, Richard's old colleague Robert, and asked him to schedule an emergency meeting first thing in the morning to discuss protecting my remaining assets and establishing formal loan agreements for any money that had already been advanced. I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Linda Hayes, whom I had worked with to settle Richard's estate, and asked her about the legal implications of demanding immediate repayment of documented loans that had been given without formal contracts. Most importantly, I called my sister Barbara, who lived in Florida and had been diplomatically suggesting for months that I might be getting taken advantage of by Samantha's family. "I've been waiting for this phone call for 2 years," Barbara said when I told her about my pharmacy abandonment and my evening of financial detective work. "I'm proud of you, Eleanor. Richard would be proud too. He didn't raise Samantha to treat people like a personal bank, especially not her own mother who sacrificed everything to help her." When Samantha and Greg finally returned home around midnight, they came through the front door laughing about something, clearly having had an enjoyable evening that had lasted considerably longer than any dental emergency I had ever heard of. The children weren't with them, which confirmed my suspicion that they had been dropped off somewhere for a sleepover that would give their parents a free evening to do whatever they had actually planned. "Oh, hi, Mom," Samantha said when she noticed me sitting in the living room with just one lamp on, surrounded by bank statements and legal documents. "How did you get home from the pharmacy? I've been worried about you all evening." Her tone was bright and cheerful, like she had genuinely forgotten that she had abandoned me there 8 hours earlier. Greg nodded along sympathetically, as if he too had been deeply concerned about my welfare, while apparently enjoying whatever entertainment had kept them out until nearly morning. Neither of them seemed to notice the papers spread across the coffee table, or the expression on my face that should have warned them that something fundamental had shifted during their absence. I looked at them both, these two adults who had managed to convince themselves that leaving a 71-year-old diabetic woman stranded at a pharmacy was acceptable behavior, and I realized that the conversation I was about to have would determine not just my financial future, but my ability to live the rest of my life with dignity, rather than as a convenient ATM for other people's dreams. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing to the couch across from where I was sitting. "Both of you, right now." Something in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the moment because their casual evening mood evaporated immediately. Samantha sat down first, looking confused and slightly defensive. Greg remained standing for a moment, as if he might try to escape this conversation the way they had escaped the pharmacy earlier, but eventually settled beside his wife with obvious reluctance. "I spent some time tonight reviewing our financial arrangements," I began, opening my folder and spreading the documents across the coffee table between us. "And I discovered some very interesting things about how my money has been supporting your family." Samantha's eyes widened as she recognized bank statements and loan records she had probably assumed I wasn't keeping track of. Greg leaned forward to examine the papers, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked very much like panic. "Mom, I can explain about some of those automatic payments," Samantha started, but I held up my hand to stop her. Actually, Samantha, I think it's time for me to do the explaining. Because what I learned tonight isn't just about money, it's about respect and honesty and what it means to be family. I picked up my legal pad with its neat columns of numbers and careful calculations that represented 4 years of financial manipulation disguised as family support, and prepared to tell them exactly what their convenient family bank was about to do to protect herself. The silence in the living room stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Samantha's face had gone through several shades of pale as she processed the bank statement spread across the coffee table, while Greg shifted uncomfortably beside her, his eyes darting between the documents and the door as if calculating his chances of escape. I had spent 71 years being accommodating, understanding, and forgiving. Tonight, that version of myself felt like a stranger I no longer recognized. $128,000, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. That's what you owe me, not counting interest, not counting the opportunity cost of what that money could have earned if I had invested it properly instead of funding your lifestyle. I watched Samantha's mouth open and close silently, like a fish gasping for air. Greg had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes when you realize the ground beneath your feet has just shifted in ways you never saw coming. Samantha finally found her voice, though it came out higher pitched than usual. Mom, that can't be right. Those numbers seem way too high. I mean, yes, you've helped us out here and there, but we've been careful to only ask when we really needed it. She reached for one of the bank statements, her hands shaking slightly as she scanned the columns of transfers. Besides, a lot of this was for the kids. You said yourself that you wanted to help with their education and activities. I pulled out a separate sheet of paper, one I had prepared while waiting for them to come home. Let me break this down for you. Since you seem confused about the details, $67,000 in direct loans that you promised to repay within months, $23,000 in household expenses that you claimed were temporary shortfalls, $38,000 in what you called family investments, which apparently included Greg's truck, Olivia's Europe trip, and Jason's travel baseball expenses that cost more than most people make in a year. Greg cleared his throat, speaking for the first time since they had sat down. Eleanor, I know it looks bad when you add it all up like that, but you have to understand our situation. Construction work is unpredictable. Sometimes I'm making good money. Sometimes there's no work for weeks. We never meant for you to carry so much of the load, but things kept coming up, emergencies that we couldn't have planned for. I turned my attention to him. This man who had convinced my daughter that his inability to maintain steady employment was somehow my responsibility to subsidize. Emergencies, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call a $15,000 motorcycle that you bought last summer? Or the $8,000 above ground pool that you installed in the backyard without consulting anyone? Or the vacation to Cancun that cost $12,000 because you decided the family needed to get away from stress? Samantha's face flushed red. Those weren't just frivolous purchases. Mom, Greg works hard when there's work, and he deserves to have some enjoyment in his life. And the pool was for the kids, so they could have friends over and feel normal instead of always being the ones who couldn't afford nice things. And who exactly was supposed to pay for these things that Greg deserved and the kids needed? I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. Because according to my records, I paid for all of them. Just like I paid for your mortgage when Greg was between jobs for 6 months. Just like I paid for Olivia's car when she turned 16 because apparently walking or taking the bus wasn't good enough for your daughter. The automatic payments were what hurt the most, though, and I wasn't finished addressing that particular betrayal. I pulled out a highlighted copy of my bank statement from the previous month, one that showed a steady stream of transfers that had become as regular as clockwork. But the real problem isn't even the big expenses. It's this, I said, pointing to the list of automatic withdrawals. Somehow, without my full understanding of what I was agreeing to, I became responsible for your basic living expenses. Samantha squirmed in her seat, unable to meet my eyes. You said you wanted to help with some of the monthly bills. You said it would be easier if we just set up automatic transfers so you wouldn't have to remember to write checks all the time. I agreed to help with groceries and utilities, I replied firmly. I did not agree to pay your mortgage, your car payments, your insurance, your cell phone bills, your gym memberships, your streaming services, and your credit card minimums. Do you want to know what I discovered when I called the bank tonight? You've been increasing the automatic transfer amounts without telling me. What started as $500 a month to help with household expenses became $3,000 a month to fund your entire lifestyle. Greg stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Look, Eleanor, I know this seems overwhelming when you lay it all out like this, but we're family. Family helps each other. You moved in here because you needed us as much as we needed you. It's not like we forced you to give us money you offered. Remember, the audacity of his statement took my breath away. I offered to help with emergencies and to contribute to household expenses as a member of this family. I did not offer to become your personal bank while being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. I gestured around the room, this space that had never truly felt like mine despite 4 years of calling it home. Do you want to know what happened to me today, Greg? Do you want to know about the emergency that was so urgent it required Samantha to abandon me at a pharmacy? Samantha's face went white. Mom, I told you there was a problem at work, Doctor. Winters needed me to come in right away. But her voice lacked conviction, and she couldn't maintain eye contact while she said it. Really? I asked, pulling out my phone. Because I called Dr. Winters' office this evening. They were very surprised to hear that there had been any emergency today. In fact, according to the receptionist, Dr. Winters was in surgery all afternoon at the hospital and never called anyone into work. I watched Samantha's carefully constructed explanation crumble in real time. So, where exactly did you go for 7 hours after you left me stranded at a pharmacy with no way to get home? The silence that followed was deafening. Greg had stopped pacing and was staring at Samantha with an expression I couldn't quite read. Samantha was looking at her hands, her face flushed with what I hoped was shame, but suspected might just be embarrassment at being caught in a lie. We went to look at houses, she whispered finally. There's a new development about an hour north of here, and we had an appointment with a realtor. We thought maybe if we could find something cheaper, we could get our finances back on track and start paying you back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You went to look at houses while I was stranded at a pharmacy, without telling me, without including me in decisions about where this family might move. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. And let me guess, you were planning to buy this cheaper house. With what money? Exactly. Samantha and Greg exchanged a look that confirmed my worst suspicions. Well, Greg said slowly, we thought maybe you could help with the down payment just as a loan. Of course, the monthly payments would be lower than what we're paying now, so we'd be able to start paying you back faster. I stared at them both, these two adults who had somehow convinced themselves that the solution to owing me $128,000 was to borrow more money from me. You abandoned me at a pharmacy so you could go shopping for a house you planned to ask me to finance. Do I have that right? It wasn't like that, Samantha protested weakly. We were trying to find a solution. We know we owe you money, and we want to make it right. We just thought if our housing costs were lower, we'd have more room in our budget to pay you back. Your budget, I repeated slowly. The budget that currently includes my money paying for your mortgage, your car payments, and most of your other expenses. The budget that apparently doesn't include enough money to pay for your own children's needs without constantly coming to me for help. I stood up, gathering the papers from the coffee table. I think you're confused about whose budget we're talking about. What happened next would determine not just my financial future, but whether I would spend my remaining years being respected as a person or exploited as a resource. I walked to my purse and pulled out a folder I had prepared while they were gone, one that contained documents they had probably never expected to see. I had a very productive evening while you were house hunting, I said, returning to my chair with the folder. I spoke with my attorney, my financial advisor, and my bank. I also had some very interesting conversations with a few other people who helped me understand exactly what's been happening in this house. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. This is from the mortgage company. Did you know that they've been calling you about missed payments for the past 3 months? Payments that I thought I was covering with my automatic transfers. Samantha's face went pale. It turns out that my money has been going into your general checking account, not directly to the mortgage company. So while I thought I was keeping you from losing your home, you were actually using my mortgage payments for other expenses and falling behind on the actual house payments? Greg slumped back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Eleanor, we can explain that. We had some unexpected expenses come up, and we thought we could catch up before you noticed. Unexpected expenses, I said, pulling out another document. Like the $5,000 you spent at the casino last month. Greg, yes, I know about that too. When you lie to your bank about suspicious charges on your account, they're very helpful about providing detailed statements. Samantha turned to stare at her husband, her mouth hanging open. You told me that money was for Jason's tournament fees. Greg couldn't meet her eyes, confirming what I had suspected when I saw the casino charges on the account statements. The Family Emergency Fund hadn't just been funding their lifestyle, it had been funding Greg's gambling habit. Or maybe you're referring to the $3,000 Samantha spent on clothes and cosmetics last month. I continued, pulling out yet another statement. The automatic transfers from my account don't just go to one place. I had the bank trace where all my money has been going, and I learned some very interesting things about how my financial support has been distributed. Samantha's defensive posture crumbled completely. Mom, I can explain all of this. Yes, I bought some things for myself, but I work hard, and I deserve to feel good about how I look. And Greg's gambling isn't as bad as you're making it sound. He won money sometimes, too. He won money sometimes, I repeated flatly. Samantha, do you hear yourself? You're defending your husband's gambling addiction with my money while owing me more than most people make in 2 years. I pulled out the final document from the folder, one that would change everything. But here's what really opened my eyes tonight. The document was a credit report I had obtained through my attorney, one that showed the true extent of Samantha and Greg's financial situation. Your credit is destroyed, both of you. You have $47,000 in credit card debt that you never mentioned to me. You're behind on your car payments. Your student loans are in default, and you have collection agencies calling about medical bills you never paid. Greg looked up from his hands, his face haggard. We didn't want to worry you with all that. We thought we could handle it ourselves. Handle it yourselves, I said, my voice getting harder. Greg, you haven't made a mortgage payment with your own money in 18 months. Samantha, your take-home pay wouldn't cover your monthly expenses, even if you didn't owe me a penny. You're not handling anything. You're drowning, and you've been using me as a life preserver while pushing me underwater in the process. The room fell silent again as the full scope of their financial deception settled over us. These weren't temporary setbacks or unexpected emergencies. This was a systematic pattern of financial irresponsibility, enabled by my willingness to help and my failure to ask hard questions about where my money was really going. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm but firm. Tomorrow morning, I'm moving out. I've already spoken with my sister Barbara, and she's arranged for a place for me to stay while I find a permanent solution. I've canceled all the automatic transfers from my accounts to yours, effective immediately. Samantha started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I've also instructed my attorney to prepare formal loan agreements for every penny you owe me, with repayment terms and interest rates that reflect the risk I've been taking by lending money to people with destroyed credit and no ability to repay. Mom, you can't just leave, Samantha said, tears starting to form in her eyes. What about the kids? What about our family? We need you here. You need my money here, I corrected her. There's a difference, though I understand why you might be confused about that. I stood up again, feeling lighter somehow, as if the weight of 4 years of financial manipulation was finally lifting from my shoulders. The children are welcome to visit me anytime they want to see their grandmother. But I will not continue to fund a lifestyle that you can't afford while being treated like an ATM with legs. Greg finally looked up, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. Where are we supposed to get the money to keep this house, to pay the bills, to take care of the kids? You can't just abandon your family when they need you most. I looked at him steadily. This man who had just accused me of abandoning my family after spending the afternoon literally abandoning me at a pharmacy. Greg, you're 43 years old. Samantha is 38. You have 3 children and a mortgage and car payments and all the responsibilities that come with being adults. Figure it out. But we can't afford to live without your help, Samantha sobbed. The house payment alone is more than half of what I make, and Greg's income is so unpredictable. We'll lose everything. Then maybe you need to lose everything, I said quietly. Maybe you need to downsize to something you can actually afford. Maybe Greg needs to find steady work instead of floating between construction jobs and casino visits. Maybe you need to learn to live within your means instead of constantly expanding your lifestyle to match whatever credit you can access. I walked toward my room, then turned back to face them one more time. I spent 4 years thinking I was helping my family build a stable life. What I was actually doing was enabling 2 adults to avoid facing the consequences of their financial choices. That ends tonight. Mom, please, Samantha called after me. Can't we work something out? Can't we sit down and make a plan that works for everyone? I paused in the doorway, looking back at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be strong and independent, who had somehow become completely dependent on my financial support. Samantha, in 4 years of living here, have you ever once asked me how I was feeling about the amount of money I was giving you? Have you ever wondered whether I could afford to keep funding your lifestyle? Have you ever considered what would happen to me if I depleted my savings trying to keep you afloat? She stared at me, unable to answer because we both knew the truth. They had never asked because they didn't want to know, as long as the money kept flowing, as long as their bills got paid and their lifestyle remained comfortable. My feelings and my financial security were irrelevant to them. I have been subsidizing your family for 4 years, I continued. I have paid for your housing, your transportation, your children's activities, your vacations, your entertainment, and apparently your gambling habit. In return, I have been lied to, taken advantage of, and today, literally abandoned when I needed help. If you think that's what family looks like, then we have very different definitions of the word. I went to my room and closed the door, leaving Samantha crying on the couch and Greg staring at the financial documents that laid bare the true cost of their comfortable life. Through the thin walls of the converted garage, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers, probably trying to figure out how they were going to pay their bills without my automatic transfers, how they were going to explain to the children why Grandma Eleanor was leaving, how they were going to manage their debt without access to my emergency fund. For the first time in 4 years, their financial problems were truly their own to solve. For the first time since Richard died, I was free to focus on my own needs, my own future, my own happiness, instead of constantly worrying about whether Samantha and Greg had enough money to maintain their lifestyle. I pulled out my suitcase and began packing the essentials, the things I would need for the next few days, while I figured out my long-term plans. Most of my belongings could wait. The important thing was getting myself out of this situation before I lost any more money or self-respect to people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. My phone rang as I was folding my medications carefully into a travel case. It was Barbara, calling to check on me and confirm the arrangements she had made for my temporary housing. "How did they take it?" she asked without preamble. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied. "Lots of tears and promises to do better, but no actual acknowledgement of what they've done or any realistic plan for paying me back. Greg actually had the nerve to say I was abandoning my family." Barbara snorted. "Abandoning them, Eleanor. You've been the only thing standing between them and financial reality for 4 years. If anyone's been abandoned, it's you." She paused, and I could hear her moving around her kitchen, probably making tea the way she always did when she was processing something difficult. "Are you having second thoughts? Because if you are, that's normal. But don't let guilt make you stay in a situation that's destroying your financial security." "No second thoughts," I said firmly, surprised by how certain I felt. "I'm actually relieved. I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying about their finances until tonight. When I finally added up all the numbers, I've been living like a person with unlimited resources when the reality is that I'm a 71-year-old widow on a fixed income who's been depleting her life savings to fund other people's poor financial decisions." "Good," Barbara said with satisfaction. "Richard would be proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. He never liked Greg. You know, he thought the man was lazy and irresponsible, but he didn't want to interfere in Samantha's marriage." I smiled, remembering Richard's diplomatic way of expressing concerns without creating family drama. He had indeed been skeptical of Greg from the beginning, though he had kept his opinions mostly to himself. Richard always was a good judge of character. I should have listened to his reservations instead of giving Greg the benefit of the doubt for so long. After I hung up with Barbara, I continued packing, working my way through the small collection of belongings that represented my independent life before I had become enmeshed in Samantha's financial chaos. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and tomorrow I would start rebuilding a life that belonged to me rather than existing as an extension of someone else's unsustainable lifestyle. Around 2:00 in the morning, I heard Samantha's soft knock on my door. "Mom, are you awake? Can we talk?" Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way that reminded me of when she was a child and had done something wrong that she didn't know how to fix. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway in her pajamas, her face puffy from crying. "I can't sleep," she said. "I keep thinking about what you said about how we never asked how you were feeling about the money. I know we messed up. Mom, I know we took advantage of you, but please don't leave. Please give us a chance to make this right." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be honest and responsible, who had somehow learned to rationalize taking advantage of her own mother. "Samantha, what exactly do you think making it right would look like? Because I've been waiting 4 years for you to make things right. And instead, the situation has only gotten worse." "We could set up a payment plan," she said eagerly. "We could budget better, cut expenses. Maybe I could pick up extra shifts at work. Greg could look for more steady employment instead of just taking whatever construction jobs come up. We could do this. Mom, we could turn things around." "With what money?" I asked gently. "Samantha, you can't afford your current lifestyle even with my subsidies. Your mortgage payment alone is more than half your income. You have credit card debt that you're not even making minimum payments on. Greg hasn't had steady work in years, and apparently what money he does make sometimes goes to the casino. What exactly are you going to cut from your budget that would free up enough money to start paying me back?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mentally going through their expenses, probably realizing for the first time that there wasn't any fat to trim. Their financial problems weren't the result of overspending on luxuries, they were the result of committing to a lifestyle they couldn't afford and then using my money to bridge the gap between their income and their expenses. Maybe we could sell the house, she said finally. Downsize to something smaller, something we could actually afford on our own income. Maybe you could, I agreed. But that's a decision you'll need to make without my financial involvement. I'm not going to help you buy another house. Samantha, I'm not going to help you get caught up on your current mortgage so you can sell this one. You're going to have to figure this out using your own resources. Her face crumpled again. But we don't have any resources. Mom, without your help, we're going to lose everything. The kids will have to change schools, give up their activities, maybe even move in with Greg's parents until we can get back on our feet. Those sound like natural consequences for the financial choices you've made, I said, though it hurt to see her pain. Samantha, I love you, and I love your children, but I cannot continue to enable a lifestyle that none of us can actually afford. You need to learn to live within your means, and you can't do that as long as I'm available to cover the shortfall. What about the kids, though? She asked desperately. What about Olivia's college plans? What about Jason's baseball? What about Emma's dance lessons? They didn't choose this situation, and they're going to be the ones who suffer when we have to cut all these things from our budget. I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the desire to fix everyone's problems and protect the children from the consequences of their parents' poor financial management. But I forced myself to remember the conversation I had overheard earlier. Olivia's casual assumption that Grandma Eleanor would pay for everything, the entitled attitude that had developed as a result of my constant financial rescue missions. The children will be fine, I said firmly. They'll learn valuable lessons about living within their means and working for what they want instead of expecting someone else to pay for everything. Maybe Olivia will apply for scholarships or choose a more affordable college. Maybe Jason will discover that he enjoys playing baseball even without expensive equipment and tournament fees. Maybe Emma will find free or low-cost activities that she enjoys just as much as expensive dance lessons. Samantha stared at me as if I had suggested something unthinkable. But they're used to a certain standard of living. They'll feel like they're being punished for something that isn't their fault. And whose fault is it that they're used to a standard of living you can't afford? I asked quietly. Samantha, you and Greg made choices about how to spend money, including my money, that created expectations and habits that were never sustainable. The children feeling disappointed about having to adjust their lifestyle is unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility to prevent. She was crying again, but quietly this time, the tears of someone who was finally beginning to understand the scope of the problem they had created. I don't know how to do this, Mom. I don't know how to manage without your help. We've gotten so used to having you handle the big expenses that I don't even know where to start. You start by making a real budget based on your actual income, I said. You figure out what you can truly afford, and you adjust your lifestyle accordingly. You get financial counseling to help you deal with your debt. You stop using credit cards for expenses you can't pay off immediately. You live like adults instead of like children whose grandmother will always bail them out. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Samantha, I love you enough to stop enabling you. I love you enough to let you face the natural consequences of your choices so you can learn to make better ones. But I will not continue to destroy my own financial security to fund a lifestyle that you've never been able to afford on your own. She nodded through her tears, finally seeming to understand that this decision was final, that no amount of pleading or promising would change my mind. Will you at least stay in touch? Will you let the kids visit you? Of course, I said, and meant it. I'm not cutting ties with the family, Samantha. I'm just establishing boundaries about money. The children are always welcome in my life, and so are you as long as you understand that I'm not available as a financial resource anymore. She hugged me, then a real hug instead of the perfunctory embraces that had become our norm over the past few years. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm sorry for taking advantage of you. I'm sorry for making you feel like your only value to us was your money. I'm sorry for abandoning you at the pharmacy. I know we messed up, and I know it's probably too late to fix it, but I am sorry. It was the first genuine apology I had received, and it meant more to me than she probably realized. Thank you for saying that, Samantha. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened. It's not too late to fix your relationship with money and with me, but it's going to require real changes, not just promises. After Samantha went back to her room, I finished packing and set my alarm for early morning. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life, one where my value wasn't measured by my willingness to solve other people's financial problems. It would be challenging, certainly, but it would be mine. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my converted garage bedroom as I loaded the last of my suitcases into Barbara's rental car. She had driven up from Florida overnight, arriving at dawn with coffee and the kind of fierce determination that only a protective sister can muster. Samantha and Greg were nowhere to be seen, though I could hear muffled voices from their bedroom, probably discussing damage control strategies that no longer mattered. "You sure you got everything important?" Barbara asked, scanning the sparse room that had been my home for 4 years. The space looked even smaller now, emptied of my personal belongings, reduced to the basic furniture that had come with my tenancy: a bed, a dresser, a small television on a card table. It struck me how little I had accumulated during my time here, as if some part of me had always known this arrangement was temporary. "Everything that matters," I replied, taking one last look around. The financial documents were safely packed in my briefcase, along with the loan agreements my attorney had prepared overnight. The children would be waking up soon, getting ready for school, probably unaware that their comfortable world was about to shift dramatically. I felt a pang of sadness for them, but not guilt. They would learn resilience from this experience, something that my constant financial rescues had prevented them from developing. As we drove away from the house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: lightness, the weight of constantly worrying about Samantha and Greg's finances, the stress of watching my savings disappear into their endless needs, the exhaustion of being valued primarily for my bank account rather than my presence. All of it was lifting with each mile we put between ourselves and their financial chaos. Barbara glanced at me from the driver's seat. "Any regrets yet?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "It's not too late to turn around if you're having second thoughts." "None," I said firmly. "I should have done this 2 years ago when you first started warning me about their spending patterns." I pulled out my phone to check my bank balance, something I had been afraid to do regularly when the automatic transfers were draining my accounts daily. For the first time in months, the number wasn't smaller than it had been the day before. "Where are we headed first?" Barbara asked as we merged onto the highway, leading away from Samantha's neighborhood, away from the house where I had slowly transformed from family member to financial enabler. "The bank," I replied. "I want to make sure all the automatic transfers are truly canceled and set up new accounts that only I have access to. Then we're meeting with my attorney at 10 to formalize the loan documentation and discuss my options for recovery." I had spent the early morning hours creating a timeline of every financial transaction, every promise of repayment, every emergency that had required my intervention. The pattern was clearer now, viewed from the distance of decision rather than the fog of enabling. The first stop was Oak Ridge Community Bank, where I had maintained accounts for over 30 years. Margaret, my longtime banker, greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism that comes from decades of working with the same customers. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have everything prepared that you requested last night. All automatic transfers have been stopped, and I've set up the new accounts with the security features you wanted." She walked me through the changes, explaining how the new account structure would prevent anyone else from accessing my funds without my explicit written authorization. "I have to say, Margaret," she added quietly, "I'm glad you're taking these precautions. The pattern of withdrawals from your accounts over the past few years was concerning, but it wasn't my place to comment unless you asked." I appreciated her discretion, though I wondered how different things might have been if someone had questioned the steady drain on my finances earlier. "What kind of pattern did you notice?" I asked, curious about the outside perspective on my financial exploitation. Margaret pulled up my account history on her computer screen. "The transfers started small and infrequent, which is normal for family assistance. But over time, they became larger and more regular until they essentially matched the income pattern of someone supporting an entire household. The amounts also increased whenever your Social Security or pension payments were deposited, almost like someone was monitoring your account for available funds." The clinical description of my financial manipulation was sobering. Viewed through Margaret's professional lens, my situation looked exactly like what it was: elder financial abuse disguised as family support. "I never thought of it in those terms," I admitted. "I kept telling myself I was helping my family through temporary difficulties." "Family assistance is wonderful when it's truly temporary and when there's genuine effort to become independent," Margaret replied diplomatically. "But what I saw in your accounts looked more like dependence than assistance. I'm sorry you had to experience that, especially from family members." After completing the banking arrangements, Barbara and I drove to the law office of Linda Hayes, the attorney who had handled Richard's estate and was now helping me navigate the legal implications of my financial separation from Samantha's family. Linda's office overlooked the downtown area where Richard and I used to walk on weekends, visiting farmers markets and antique shops. The familiarity of the view made me feel grounded, connected to the life I had built with Richard rather than the life I had allowed to be consumed by Samantha's needs. I've reviewed all the documentation you provided, Linda said, spreading loan agreements across her conference table. The good news is that you kept meticulous records of every financial transaction. The challenging news is that most of these loans were made without formal contracts, which complicates enforcement, but doesn't make recovery impossible. She explained the legal options available to me, from informal payment plans to formal debt collection procedures. The key question is what outcome you're hoping for. Do you want full repayment at all costs? Or are you more interested in establishing clear boundaries and protecting your remaining assets? I considered her question carefully. I want my money back, but I also want them to learn that their financial choices have consequences. If I make this too easy for them, they'll just see it as another bailout rather than a wake-up call about their spending habits. Linda nodded approvingly. Then I'd recommend we start with formal demand letters requiring repayment within 90 days, followed by payment plans if they can demonstrate genuine effort to repay. If they ignore the demands or fail to make meaningful payments, we can pursue more aggressive collection methods. What about their house? Barbara asked. If they can't afford the mortgage without Eleanor's subsidies, won't they lose it anyway? Probably, Linda admitted. Their mortgage payments are unsustainable on their actual income, especially with their existing debt load. But that's not Eleanor's problem to solve. In fact, if they do lose the house, any equity they've built up could be used toward repaying Eleanor's loans. The conversation was businesslike, focused on legal strategies and financial recovery, rather than emotional manipulation or family guilt. I found the clarity refreshing after years of having every financial discussion clouded by appeals to family loyalty and children's needs. My money was my money, regardless of who wanted to borrow it or why they thought they deserved it. There's one more thing we should discuss, Linda continued. Given the amounts involved and the pattern of behavior you've described, this situation could potentially be reported as elder financial abuse. That would involve law enforcement and could result in criminal charges, though it would also make the situation much more public and contentious. I thought about Samantha's tearful apology in the hallway, about Greg's obvious desperation when he realized their funding source was disappearing. I don't want to pursue criminal charges unless they refuse to acknowledge the debt or make any effort to repay it, but I want them to understand that it's an option if they don't take this seriously. After the meeting with Linda, Barbara and I drove to the extended stay hotel where I would be living while I figured out my long-term housing situation. The room was small but clean, with a kitchenette that would allow me to prepare simple meals and a desk where I could manage my finances and correspondence. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine paid for with my own money, without anyone else's input or approval. This feels strange, I admitted to Barbara as we unpacked my suitcases. I haven't lived alone since Richard died, and I haven't made independent decisions about my living situation in 4 years. I'm excited, but also a little nervous about being completely responsible for myself again. Barbara smiled. You were responsible for yourself for 71 years before you moved in with Samantha, and you were responsible for everyone else for the 4 years you lived there. I think you'll manage just fine. She paused, folding my clothes into the hotel dresser. What are you thinking for long-term housing back to your old neighborhood, somewhere completely new? I had been considering that question since the night before, when I first decided to leave Samantha's house. I think I want to try something different, maybe a senior community, where I can be around people my own age who are dealing with similar life situations. Samantha's neighborhood always made me feel like an outsider, like I was the only person who wasn't juggling work and young children and mortgages they couldn't afford. That sounds perfect, Barbara agreed. You need to be around people who see you as Eleanor Mitchell. Interesting person and good friend, not Eleanor Mitchell. Convenient funding source. She sat down on the hotel room's single chair, looking serious. Can I ask you something? Though, are you worried about Samantha and the kids, about what's going to happen to them when they can't pay their bills? I had been waiting for this question, knowing that my decision to cut off financial support would inevitably raise concerns about the children's welfare. I'm sad for them, I said honestly. I wish their parents had made better financial decisions that wouldn't put them in this position. But I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of Samantha and Greg's choices, even if those consequences affect the children. I sat down on the bed, facing Barbara. You know what I realized last night. I've been so focused on protecting the children from their parents' financial irresponsibility that I've actually been enabling that irresponsibility to continue. As long as Grandma Eleanor was available to pay for everything, Samantha and Greg never had to make the hard choices that responsible parents make. Like living within their means, Barbara added. Like choosing between expensive activities and other expenses. Like explaining to their children that not every family can afford everything they want. Exactly. Olivia is 16 years old and has never been told no about money. Jason assumes that expensive equipment and travel tournaments are normal parts of playing baseball. Emma thinks dance lessons and new clothes and birthday parties that cost thousands of dollars are just standard childhood experiences. I felt sad about the lessons they would have to learn, but also relieved that I wouldn't be the one teaching them that money was unlimited. They'll be fine, Barbara said firmly. Children are remarkably adaptable, and learning to live within a budget might actually be good for them in the long run. It's Samantha and Greg I'm worried about. They've gotten so used to having you solve their financial problems that I'm not sure they remember how to be responsible for themselves, as if summoned by our conversation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Samantha. Mom, the kids are asking where you are. What should I tell them? I showed the message to Barbara, who rolled her eyes. Notice how she's not asking how you're doing or whether you're safe, Barbara observed. She's asking what she should tell the children, which really means she wants you to feel guilty about leaving. I typed back a simple response. Tell them I moved out, but that I love them and hope to see them soon. I didn't offer my address, didn't promise visits, didn't provide the reassurance that Samantha was obviously seeking. The children deserved honest communication about the situation, but that was Samantha's responsibility as their mother, not mine to manage from a distance. The afternoon brought more text messages and phone calls from Samantha, each one escalating in urgency as the reality of their financial situation became clearer. The first was about the mortgage payment that was due in 3 days. The second was about utilities that were scheduled to be shut off for non-payment. The third was about the credit card companies that were threatening collection action. I didn't respond to any of them. Linda had advised me to direct all communication through her office, both to maintain appropriate boundaries and to create a legal record of any attempts at manipulation or coercion. Every message Samantha sent was forwarded to Linda's email, building a file that would be useful if formal debt collection became necessary. By evening, Greg was calling too, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and became increasingly angry as I didn't return his calls. Eleanor, I know you're upset, but you can't just abandon us like this. We have children to think about. We have responsibilities. You can't just decide overnight to stop helping family. Barbara and I listened to the voicemails together, analyzing the language Greg used and the assumptions behind his demands. He still doesn't get it, Barbara observed. He still thinks this is about you being upset rather than about them being financially irresponsible, and he's still assuming that your money belongs to their family somehow. That's what 4 years of enabling does, I replied sadly. It creates expectations that become entitlements. Greg genuinely believes that I owe them continued financial support because that's what I've been providing. The idea that I might have my own financial needs or limitations literally doesn't occur to him. The next morning brought a surprise visit that I had been half expecting since I left. Barbara and I were having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when I saw Samantha walking across the parking lot, looking determined and slightly frantic. She had obviously tracked down my location, probably by calling every extended stay hotel in the area until she found one that would confirm my presence. She found you, Barbara murmured, watching Samantha approach the restaurant entrance. Do you want to talk to her, or should we slip out the back? I considered my options. Samantha needed to understand that her financial emergency was not my crisis to solve, but she also deserved the opportunity to have that conversation directly rather than through attorneys and voicemails. I'll talk to her, I decided, but briefly, and with you here as a witness to whatever she says. Samantha spotted us immediately and hurried over to our table, her face a mixture of desperation and determination. She looked like she hadn't slept, which was probably true given the financial chaos that was undoubtedly unfolding at home. Mom, thank God I found you. We need to talk. This whole situation is spiraling out of control, and I need your help to fix it. Sit down, Samantha, I said calmly, gesturing to an empty chair. But I want to be clear from the beginning that I'm not here to discuss resuming financial support for your family. That decision is final. She sat down heavily, pulling out a manila folder stuffed with papers. Mom, I know you're angry, and I understand why, but look at these bills. Look at what's happening. If you don't help us, we're going to lose the house. The kids will have to change schools. Jason will have to quit baseball. Olivia won't be able to go to college. Everything we've worked for will be gone. I looked at the stack of bills she was spreading across the table, the same bills I had been indirectly paying for years through my automatic transfers and emergency loans. Samantha, these aren't my bills. These are your bills. The fact that you can't pay them without my money doesn't make them my responsibility. But we're family, she protested. Family helps each other. You say yourself when I was growing up that we always take care of our own people. How is this different? It's different because taking care of family doesn't mean taking over all their financial responsibilities, I replied. It means helping during genuine emergencies. Not subsidizing a lifestyle that someone can't afford on their own income? Samantha's voice rose slightly, attracting attention from other restaurant patrons. This is a genuine emergency. Mom, we're about to lose everything. How much more genuine does an emergency need to be? Barbara leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. Samantha, can I ask you something? What exactly is your plan for paying Eleanor back the $128,000 you already owe her? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want to borrow more money from her to pay bills that you couldn't afford, even when she was covering most of your expenses. Samantha turned to Barbara with obvious irritation. This is between me and my mother. Barbara, I know you think you're helping, but this is a family matter. Eleanor is my family too, Barbara replied evenly. And someone needs to advocate for her interests since you seem focused entirely on your own needs. I put my hand on Barbara's arm, signaling that I wanted to handle the conversation myself. Samantha, let me ask you the same question Barbara just asked. What's your plan for repaying the money you already owe me? Because lending you more money when you haven't repaid previous loans would be throwing good money after bad. Samantha looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. I know we owe you money. Mom, a lot of money. But if we lose the house, we'll never be able to get back on our feet enough to pay you back. If you help us through this crisis, we can get stable and then work on a repayment plan. Samantha, you've been saying that for 4 years, I pointed out. Every loan was going to be the last one. Every payment I made was going to give you time to get your finances under control. When exactly has that happened? She was quiet for a long moment, probably realizing that she couldn't point to any time when their finances had actually improved despite my constant support. This time will be different, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. How? I asked simply. How will this time be different? What changes are you and Greg planning to make that will allow you to live within your means and start repaying your debts? Samantha opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to articulate a plan that didn't exist. We'll budget better, she said finally. We'll cut expenses. Greg will find steady work. We'll stop using credit cards for things we can't afford. Those are all excellent ideas, I agreed, and you can start implementing them immediately, whether or not I continue to subsidize your lifestyle. In fact, you'll probably be more motivated to make those changes if you don't have my money as a safety net. But, Mom, Samantha said, her voice breaking, we can't afford to live without your help. The mortgage alone is more than half my income. Even if Greg finds steady work, we'll barely break even on our basic expenses. Then you need to downsize to something you can afford on your actual income, I said gently but firmly. Samantha, you and Greg have been living in a house that costs more than you can afford, driving cars that cost more than you can afford, and maintaining a lifestyle that costs more than you can afford. The solution isn't for me to keep funding that lifestyle. The solution is for you to adjust your lifestyle to match your income. Samantha started crying, then not the manipulative tears of someone trying to get their way, but the genuine tears of someone who was finally understanding the scope of their financial problems. I don't know how to do that, Mom. I don't know how to tell the kids that we have to move to a smaller house, that they can't have the things their friends have, that we can't afford the activities they're used to. You tell them the truth, I said, my heart aching for her pain even as I remained firm in my decision. You tell them that your family made some financial mistakes, and now you need to make some changes to fix those mistakes. Children are more resilient than you think. Samantha, they'll adapt to a new normal if you help them understand that it's necessary. Barbara pulled out her phone and showed Samantha a website she had been browsing. There are financial counseling services that can help you create a realistic budget and deal with your debt, she said. There are programs to help people avoid foreclosure by negotiating with mortgage companies. There are resources available, but you have to be willing to use them instead of expecting Eleanor to solve everything. Samantha looked at the information Barbara was showing her, her face a mixture of hope and overwhelm. But what if it's too late? What if we've already messed up too badly to fix it? Then you'll learn from the experience and make better choices going forward, I said. Samantha, failure isn't the end of the world. It's a learning opportunity. But you can't learn from your financial mistakes if someone is always rescuing you from the consequences. I reached across the table and took Samantha's hand. I love you, sweetheart. I love you enough to let you face this situation and figure out how to handle it yourselves. But I will not continue to destroy my own financial security to enable choices that you can't afford to make. Samantha squeezed my hand, nodding through her tears. I understand, she said quietly. I don't like it, and I'm scared about what's going to happen, but I understand why you can't keep helping us the way you have been. It was the first time in 4 years that Samantha had acknowledged the impact of their financial dependence on me. The first time she had recognized that my resources weren't unlimited. The first time she had seemed to understand that I had needs and concerns beyond solving her family's problems. "What happens now?" she asked, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "I mean, with us, with our relationship. Are you going to disappear from our lives because we messed up so badly?" "I'm not disappearing," I assured her. "I'm establishing boundaries. I want to have a relationship with you and the children that isn't centered around money and financial crisis. I want to be your mother and their grandmother, not your bank." Samantha nodded, seeming to understand the distinction. "The kids miss you," she said. "They keep asking when you're coming home, and I don't know what to tell them." "Tell them that Grandma Eleanor loves them very much and hopes to see them soon, but that I needed to move out so their parents could learn to handle their responsibilities independently," I suggested. "When you're ready to have me visit without it being about money or financial help, call me. I'd love to spend time with Olivia and Jason and Emma that isn't complicated by financial stress." After Samantha left, Barbara and I finished our breakfast in thoughtful silence. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, and I felt hopeful that Samantha was finally beginning to understand the need for boundaries and personal responsibility. "How do you feel?" Barbara asked as we walked back to our hotel room. "Any regrets about the conversation?" "Sad, but not regretful," I replied honestly. It breaks my heart to see Samantha struggle, but it also gives me hope that she might finally be ready to make real changes instead of just looking for the next bailout. The afternoon brought a call from Linda with updates on the legal situation. "I've sent the formal demand letters to Samantha and Greg," she reported. "They have 90 days to respond with either full payment or a realistic payment plan. I've also included information about the potential for escalation if they ignore the demands. Any word from them yet?" "Nothing official," I said, though I knew it was too early for a formal response. But Samantha tracked me down this morning. She brought a stack of bills and tried to convince me that they'll never be able to repay me if I don't help them keep their house. "That's a common manipulation tactic," Linda sighed. "The idea that they can only repay you if you lend them more money first. Stand firm. The demand letters will help them understand that this isn't a negotiation, it's a legal obligation." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made plans that were entirely about my own enjoyment. Barbara and I drove to the downtown arts district, where a local theater was performing a play I had wanted to see for months. Richard and I used to attend theater performances regularly, but after he died and I moved in with Samantha's family, my social life had gradually disappeared into their schedule of work and children's activities and financial crises. Sitting in the theater, watching talented actors bring a story to life, I felt reconnected to the parts of myself that had nothing to do with being a mother or grandmother or financial provider. I was simply Eleanor Mitchell, woman who enjoyed theater and art and cultural experiences that fed her soul rather than draining her bank account. "When was the last time you did something like this?" Barbara asked during intermission as we sipped wine in the theater lobby. "4 years ago," I realized. "Right before I moved in with Samantha. Richard and I had season tickets here, but I let them lapse when I moved because Samantha's family was always so busy with other things. I told myself it was a sacrifice worth making to be more available for the children." "And were you more available for the children?" Barbara asked pointedly. "Or were you more available to solve their parents' financial problems?" I thought about my years in Samantha's house, about how my time had been spent. Most of my energy had gone toward managing household finances, covering unexpected expenses, and worrying about their next crisis. The children had benefited from having their activities funded and their basic needs met, but I hadn't actually spent much quality time with them that wasn't somehow related to logistics or money. I was more available to be their ATM, I admitted. The children and I didn't develop closer relationships during those 4 years. If anything, I became more distant from them as they started taking my financial support for granted. As we settled back into our seats for the second act, I made a mental note to explore season ticket options for the coming year. I had the time and resources to enjoy cultural activities again, now that I wasn't constantly worried about Samantha's next financial emergency or calculating how much of my savings I could afford to lose each month. The play was excellent, a story about resilience and new beginnings that felt particularly relevant to my current situation. During the curtain call, I found myself applauding not just for the performers, but for my own courage in choosing a different path forward. On the drive back to the hotel, Barbara brought up the question I had been avoiding. "What's your timeline for figuring out permanent housing? I can stay another few days to help you look at options, but I do need to get back to Florida eventually." "I've been thinking about that," I said. "I want to take some time to really consider what I want my life to look like going forward, instead of just reacting to the immediate crisis, maybe a month or two to explore different communities and housing options without pressure." Good plan, Barbara agreed. You've spent 4 years living according to other people's needs and preferences. You deserve time to figure out what you actually want for yourself. Back in my hotel room that night, I made a list of things I wanted to explore in the coming week's senior communities within an hour of the city, but far enough away that I wouldn't constantly run into Samantha and Greg at grocery stores or restaurants, cultural activities and volunteer opportunities that would give me purpose and social connection. Maybe even travel opportunities that I had put aside when my money started going toward other people's priorities. For the first time in years, I was planning a future that was entirely my own, funded by my own resources, and designed around my own interests and values. It felt both exciting and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a new life that I would have to create from scratch. As I got ready for bed, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. 48 hours ago, I had been a woman trapped in a cycle of financial enabling, valued primarily for my willingness to solve other people's problems. Tonight, I was a woman with options, with resources, with the freedom to make choices based on my own needs and desires. The road ahead would have challenges, certainly. Samantha and Greg would probably continue to pressure me for financial help, and I would have to remain firm in my boundaries despite the guilt and manipulation that would inevitably follow. But I was no longer a victim of other people's poor financial planning, and that knowledge gave me strength I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring new decisions and new opportunities to build the life I wanted, rather than the life that other people needed me to fund. For the first time since Richard died, I felt excited about my future instead of anxious about other people's problems. It was a good feeling, one I intended to protect carefully as I moved forward into whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since I moved out, and the phone calls from Samantha's house had evolved from desperate to frantic to oddly silent. The last communication I'd received was a voicemail from Olivia, Samantha's 16-year-old daughter, asking if I was okay and mentioning that things at home are pretty stressful right now. I had forwarded the message to Linda, my attorney, who noted that using the children to attempt contact violated the boundaries we had established for communication. Barbara had returned to Florida after helping me settle into a furnished apartment in Pinewood, a senior living community about 40 minutes from Samantha's neighborhood. The distance felt appropriate, close enough to maintain relationships if they developed in healthy directions, far enough to avoid accidental encounters that might complicate my newfound independence. My new apartment was bright and spacious, with a view of the community gardens and enough room for the belongings I was slowly retrieving from storage. The morning brought an unexpected visitor to the community's front desk. Nancy, the receptionist, called my apartment to let me know that Greg was in the lobby, asking to see me. My stomach tightened with a familiar anxiety, the old habit of taking responsibility for other people's emotional states. Then I remembered Linda's advice about maintaining boundaries and the importance of documented communication. Please let him know that I'm not available for unscheduled visits, I told Nancy. If he has something to discuss, he can contact my attorney's office to arrange appropriate communication. Nancy, who had worked with many residents navigating difficult family situations, handled the message professionally. I watched from my apartment window as Greg stood in the parking lot for several minutes, apparently making phone calls before driving away in obvious frustration. 20 minutes later, Linda called with an update that explained Greg's unexpected visit. The 90-day deadline for responding to our demand letters expires tomorrow, she informed me. We haven't received any communication from them about repayment plans or acknowledgement of the debt. Under the terms we outlined, that means we can proceed with formal collection procedures. I have been dreading this conversation, even though I knew it was inevitable. Taking legal action against family members felt like crossing a line I had never imagined crossing, but the alternative was allowing them to essentially steal over $100,000 while facing no consequences for their behavior. What exactly does formal collection involve? I asked, settling into my reading chair with a cup of tea. The normality of the question discussing legal action against my own daughter while sitting in my comfortable apartment struck me as surreal. Several options, Linda explained. We can file a civil lawsuit seeking judgment for the full amount, plus interest and legal fees. We can attempt to garnish wages, though that's complicated given Greg's irregular employment. Most effectively, we can place liens on any property they own, including their house, which would prevent them from selling or refinancing without satisfying the debt. The house, I repeated. The same house where I had lived for 4 years, contributing to mortgage payments that I now realized had been sporadically made despite my regular contributions. What happens if they lose the house to foreclosure? Would I still be able to recover any money? Possibly, Linda said. If there's any equity in the property after the mortgage company is satisfied, creditors with valid judgments would have claims against those proceeds. But honestly, Eleanor, given their debt load and the housing market in their area, there probably isn't much equity to recover. I thought about Olivia, Jason, and Emma about the upheaval they would experience if their parents lost the house. Then I thought about the conversation I had overheard Olivia's casual assumption that Grandma Eleanor would pay for everything, the entitlement that my enabling had created in all of them. Proceed with the legal action, I decided. File the lawsuit and place the liens. They need to understand that ignoring legal obligations has serious consequences, and I need to protect what's left of my financial security. After hanging up with Linda, I did something that would have been impossible. While living in Samantha's house, I went for a long walk through the community grounds without telling anyone where I was going or when I would be back. The freedom to move through my day without coordinating with anyone else's schedule still felt revolutionary after 4 years of having my time and attention constantly claimed by other people's needs. The community gardens were in full spring bloom, tended by residents who had found purpose and social connection in growing vegetables and flowers together. I struck up a conversation with Margaret, a woman about my age who was transplanting seedlings with the kind of focused attention that comes from years of gardening experience. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked, wiping soil from her hands. "I'm Margaret Chin. I moved here about 2 years ago after my husband passed away. Best decision I ever made." "Eleanor Mitchell," I replied. "I just moved in a few weeks ago, still getting used to having my own space again after living with family for several years." Margaret nodded knowingly. "Ah, the family living situation. I tried that with my son's family for about 6 months after David died. Lasted exactly long enough for me to realize I was turning into their live-in babysitter and housekeeper. Moving here gave me my life back." Her casual acknowledgement of the challenges of multi-generational living made me feel less alone in my experience. "Did your family understand when you decided to move out?" "Not initially." Margaret laughed. "My daughter-in-law kept talking about how I was abandoning my responsibilities to the family, how they needed my help with the children, how it wasn't safe for someone my age to live alone. What she really meant was that they needed my help paying for childcare and that my pension was helping them afford their lifestyle. The parallel to my own situation was striking. How did you handle the guilt? The feeling that you were letting them down?" Margaret sat back on her heels, considering the question seriously. I realized that I wasn't actually helping them by solving all their problems. My son had gotten so dependent on having me handle childcare and household management that he had stopped developing his own parenting skills. My daughter-in-law was working part-time because she knew I was available to pick up the slack, which meant they never had to face the real cost of their family decisions. She gestured toward the garden around us, where several other residents were working peacefully among the plants. "Here, I'm Margaret, the person who grows amazing tomatoes and knows all the best movies from the 1970s, not Margaret. The convenient solution to other people's problems is a much better way to live." I spent the afternoon helping in the garden, learning about soil preparation and companion planting from people who are passionate about growing things, rather than people who saw me primarily as a source of funding for their various projects. The difference in how I was treated was remarkable. These people were interested in my opinions, my experiences, my knowledge about topics that had nothing to do with my bank account. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. When I finally picked up, it was Jason, Samantha's 13-year-old son, speaking in the hushed tones of someone who didn't want to be overheard. "Grandma Eleanor, it's Jason. I'm calling from my friend's house because Mom and Dad took away my phone." His voice was small, uncertain, very different from the confident boy who had assumed his expensive baseball equipment was simply part of his natural entitlement. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently. "Are you okay? Are you safe?" "Yeah, I'm safe, but things are really weird at home. Mom and Dad keep fighting about money, and they told us we might have to move to a smaller house. Olivia is really upset because she thinks she won't be able to go to college now." He paused, and I could hear the confusion and anxiety in his silence. "I'm sorry things are stressful at home," I said carefully, aware that anything I said might be reported back to Samantha and Greg. "But your parents are capable people who will figure out how to handle their responsibilities. But why can't you just come back and help them figure it out?" Jason asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Everyone says you're mad at us, but I don't understand what we did wrong. We love you, Grandma Eleanor. Doesn't that matter?" The question pierced through all my carefully constructed boundaries and legal strategies. Of course their love mattered. Of course I cared about their welfare and their futures. But I had learned the hard way that love without respect and appreciation becomes exploitation, and that helping people avoid consequences prevents them from learning to make better choices. "Your love absolutely matters, Jason," I said, fighting back tears. "I love you and your sisters more than you can imagine, but love doesn't mean that I'm responsible for solving all your family's problems or paying for things your parents can't afford." "But you have money," Jason said with the simple logic of a 13-year-old. And we need money. Isn't that what families do, help each other? Families do help each other, I agreed. But help doesn't mean one person pays for everything, while everyone else gets to avoid responsibility for their choices. Real help means teaching people to solve their own problems and make good decisions. Jason was quiet for a moment, processing this concept that was apparently new to him. So, you're not going to help us keep our house. Jason, your parents are adults with jobs and the ability to make decisions about where and how your family lives. Those are their decisions to make, not mine. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would probably be reported to Samantha and Greg, but needed to be said anyway. If your family has to move to a smaller house or make other changes, that doesn't mean your lives are ruined. It means your parents are learning to live within their means, which is something all adults need to know how to do. After Jason hung up, I sat in my apartment, feeling emotionally drained but resolute. The children's confusion and distress were real, but they were the natural consequences of their parents' financial mismanagement and their own learned entitlement. Protecting them from those consequences would only delay their eventual learning about money, responsibility, and realistic expectations. The next morning brought news that I had been expecting, but still dreaded. Linda called to inform me that the formal legal proceedings had been initiated. I filed the lawsuit yesterday afternoon, and the sheriff's department will serve Samantha and Greg with papers today. I also filed the property liens, which means they can't sell or refinance their house without addressing your debt. How long does the legal process usually take? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be measured in months rather than weeks. That depends on their response, Linda explained. If they ignore the lawsuit, we can get a default judgment fairly quickly. If they contest it or try to negotiate, it could take several months to resolve. Either way, the liens are in place immediately, so your interests are protected. I spent the morning at the community center, attending a financial planning seminar designed for seniors who were managing their resources independently. The irony wasn't lost on me after 4 years of having my finances managed by other people's needs. I was relearning how to budget and plan for my own future without considering anyone else's expenses or emergencies.